tonight's Bible study. We pick up in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, and we'll read verse 17 through 26. Um, if you remember, we are started in the Beatitudes, or what we call the Sermon on the Mount. First with the Beatitudes, we took 2 weeks for that. Last week we had the part about being salt and light. And then Jesus continues with the Sermon on the Mount with these words where he said, "Do not think I've come to abolish the law, the prophet or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter into the kingdom of heaven." Let's pause there for a moment because those are very drastic words that Jesus is writing. He first started with the Beatitudes on the Sermon on the Mount. He sat down and he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," and pointed out to here are the Christian values. You have to be spiritually poor and submit yourself to God, and you have to be meek, and on and on. And he then goes on and said, "You're blessed when you're persecuted for my name's sake," and he points out that we are salt and light, and we had that discussion last week about light being allowing others to see. And then he continues with the Sermon on the Mount and points out, "Do not think I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." And so this is a key concept, that Jesus did not come to abolish the law or the prophets, but to fulfill them. And he fulfilled them on the cross. And today we are no longer under the law because of what Christ did for us on the cross. But at the same time, Jesus is teaching something very important for us here. Even though we are not on the law anymore, we cannot think, well, as I've heard some people say, now that I'm a Christian and we're saved by grace through faith, we're not under the law, and so we don't have to keep the commandments. And that's not true. Because as we will see, Jesus is saying that we're not under the law, but our righteousness, being in right relationship with God, must surpass that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And I don't know if you understand what Jesus is saying here. The Pharisees were very, very religious. They practice the law in every detail that they can every day. The way they dress, how far they walked, how much work they did per day, what they did on the Sabbath. They had all these laws. You and I mainly think of the Ten Commandments when we think of the law. But from a Jewish perspective, and especially during the time of Jesus, there were all these temple laws. There was all these customary laws and dietary laws, work laws, clothing laws. There were so many laws that people could not keep up with them. To be a Jew, you obviously would want to eat kosher, and you'd want to not work on the Sabbath, and you want to honor. But beyond that, there was all these other laws. I'll give you a silly example. For example, if you picked up your clothes on the Sabbath and moved them from one room to the other, that was work. If you built a fire and struck a match, that was work. They had all these things about, and the only thing it says, honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. But they had all these things that if you're honoring it and you do not work, what is work? And so they define work onto not building a fire, so no cooking. You can't walk but so far. And Jesus later on will point out that some of these laws that they made upon laws are kind of silly. For example, he pointed out if your ox is in a ditch on the Sabbath, you would get it out. Otherwise the animal would die, and it's too valuable an animal to die. Um, an example of the way the Pharisees and the teachers of the law would be able to get around the law would be a good example. They could not move their clothes. Say a Pharisee, for example, had a wardrobe of clothes that was more weight than the required amount to move, which would be considered work. He could not run in if his house was on fire, grab the clothes, and run out with it. But what he could do is go in his house, put on all those jackets, one on top of the other, and walk out with it, because then he would just be clothed and it wouldn't be breaking the law. And so the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the more they knew the law, the more they knew loopholes. And that's the point that Jesus is saying is there's a big difference between fulfilling the letter of the law and fulfilling the spirit of the law. And so he's saying that our righteousness must surpass that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And he said, I did not come to abolish the law. As a matter of fact, he goes up. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappears, not the smallest letter, not even the least stroke of a pen will have by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Um, for us as Christians, we believe that Jesus, when he was on the cross and before he died, he said, it is finished, that he accomplished the mission of doing away with the law. Um, so we are not under the law, but yet at the same time, we still keep the law, not because we are trying to fulfill the law or the prophets, because Jesus did that. Jesus fulfilled the law and the prophets. Um, and he did that by his life, his death, burial, and resurrection. He was the perfect sacrifice, the Lamb of God. And so on the cross, he said, it is finished, it is accomplished. The law was complete, and he fulfilled the law and the prophets. So in Jesus Christ, we see the law and prophets are fulfilled. But we need to be very careful still, because listen to what it says. Anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do so will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. Um, and this verse, along with a verse in James, where teachers will be held more responsible, almost kept me from becoming a minister or pastor. But I knew that God called me, and so that's why I am in the position I'm in. But here we see that what Jesus is pointing out is, if we break the least commandment, we are still guilty. Here's the point, folks. A sin is a sin is a sin. And so sin separates us from God. But here's the thing. If I break a command and I sin, I am responsible for myself. But if I turn around and teach somebody to break that commandment, then I'm responsible for them also. And so that's what Jesus is saying. Whosoever practices and teaches these commands, to someone else is guilty and will be called the least in heaven. On the other hand, whosoever keeps the commandments and teach it to others will be called, greatest in heaven. And so it is a responsibility that teachers, pastors have, is we need to teach the right thing to the people who are following and listening. Not that I can be perfect, or any of us as teachers can be perfect, but we need to try to set an example, and teach. And when we're wrong, we're wrong, and admit it. As a matter of fact, we have today, we're going down to verse 26, because in the next few verses after this, Jesus are going to give examples. And the first one have to do with murder. And I have to remind y'all, this is an example. There are so many other things, and Jesus will point out a few others about adultery and divorce and taking an oath and on and on. So let's look at this first example for this week. He goes on, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother. Then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary, who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still with him on the way, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you will be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. And here Jesus is saying the way we deal with our fellow human beings, the big extreme is murder. And we see that is exactly what happened in the very first brothers, Cain and Abel. Cain decided, because he disliked what Abel did, he murdered him. He killed him. And some people make a big deal. The word is thou shalt not murder. In the Ten Commandments we heard thou shalt not kill. But in reality it is thou shalt not murder. Because we do have a loophole, so to speak, for killing. I mean, we have capital punishment. For example, if a person commit a certain crime, capital punishment. So is the person who is, the person who has the responsibility to carry out the capital punishment, is he murdering that other person, or is he killing that other person? We could try to be like the Pharisees and split here, but here's the difference. A murder is when you go out and kill someone for no reason. A capital punishment is when someone is put to death by society because of their behavior. And so Jesus is saying, you have heard, don't murder. Another example of a loophole: if you're at war and you're a soldier and you're defending your country and you have to kill the enemy. And we saw that David, for example, was in many battles and killed Goliath and killed all the Philistines and all the enemies. He's not guilty of murder. He killed people, but he did it in self-defense, in being a soldier. And that was not murder. But murder is when we deliberately take somebody's life who does not deserve to be dead or to be killed. For example, in a war, it's a war. It's not murder. So they're trying to kill you and you're trying to kill them, not because you hate them, not because you have anything against them, but because of the state we're in. And I wanted to bring this up for a couple reasons. For right now, we have a war in Ukraine. How do we decide, if you are a Ukrainian, for example, defending your country against people who want to come in and take over and oppress you? So you pick up an arms and shoot back at them. Is that, you're killing people, but that is not murder. You're defending and you're a military person. Or even an ordinary Ukrainian. We've seen at least I've been following the war, people who haven't joined the army. They buy these drones and hook up a little bomb thing on it and fly it over, and they see a Russian soldier who is trying to attack Ukraine, and they drop that bomb and kill the soldier. So during a war, killing the enemy is not murder, but killing somebody just because you want to kill them. And a good example of murder that is very famous is like Ted Bundy, who just went around murdering people, killing them for no cause or reason. There's not a war. It's not they're being punished because of behavior that's that's. So Jesus is saying, you've heard, and we know the commandment, thou shalt not murder. And he said, so what if you never killed someone, but you have been angry at your fellow human being? You've been angry at your brother, that you will be subject to judgment. And what Jesus is trying to teach is that the root of murder is anger. Just like Cain killed his brother because he was angry at him. There was not a war. There was not, Abel did not do something to be punished Um, he just killed him because of anger. And what Jesus is pointing out, that the root of murder is anger, and that we need to deal with the sin just like that. Your righteousness must surpass the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. The Pharisee, for example, can be in a person's face very angry. And we saw that, for example, they accused Jesus of a lot of things and did a lot of stuff in anger and hate and malice at Jesus, accused him of stuff. Jesus is saying they are guilty of sin because the sin starts within. And so what Jesus is arguing here is that murder starts first with anger, with people's emotion. So the outward act of murder, I might have not committed the outward act, but how many times I've been so angry at somebody, if there was no consequences, such as capital punishment, would I not want to just hit them, kill them? And that's what Jesus is saying. The root of murder is hate and anger, and that we need to deal with the root of the sin, not just the sin itself. And so the Pharisees just deal with the sin, murder, but he's saying we need to deal, or righteousness surpass the Pharisees. We need to deal with the root of the sin. And that's what it means to be a Christian. We don't just deal with the last resort. I don't know about, I think about this, about these red line. I remember as a kid I used to draw a line. You step over this and there's a fight. I mean, it was a silly thing. There's no red line. For us as Christians, we're a people of love. We should not murder people or kill people. The reality, as a person of love, and it gives the example. He says, therefore, if any of you are offering a gift at the altar and remember that your brother has something against you, a brother, a friend, a fellow human being, leave the gift. And here's what he's pointing out. You're going to the temple, you're giving a gift to God, and you remember you have a problem with a fellow human being. Get that cleared out before you deal with God. You want to deal with God with a clear conscience. He said, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled with your brother. Then come and offer your gift. In other words, the way we as Christians deal with things is it's called forgiveness and reconciliation. Rather than, I think about it. Somebody who hates another person, and over time the hate grows and grows and grows and grows. Eventually it comes to blows, and eventually one of them kill another. Jesus is saying, deal with it while it's small. Another way I'd like to point out with this is right now we have these forest fires. All fires start with a little spark that grows and grows. And Jesus is saying, kill the sin while it is small. Kill the sin while it is small. Kill it with anger. And if you had something wrong with you and your brother, sister, friend, whoever, go and reconcile. And reconciliation meaning pointing out that, hey, I did wrong. Forgive me. And forgiving other people, and getting the relationship back on track. And Jesus goes on and said, these are good advice. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still with him on the way. As Christians, we should not, if we have, there are times we take different sides in matters. But we should really, rather than taking things to court and getting it all blown out and out of proportion, we should settle it while it's small. Settle it quickly. He goes on, it says, do it while you're still on the way. Or else what happens is it grows, and it's like that little fire that turns into a huge forest fire that's uncontrollable, that it takes thousands of people to put it out, burn down homes and stuff. He said, deal with it while you're still on the way. Deal with it while it is small. Otherwise, if his anger and your anger, and you have these things with each other, he may hand you over to the judge, and if you're guilty and the judge find you guilty, the judge will hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. In other words, if you have done wrong, admit it, pay for it, get the relationship back in gear, forgive, pay your just debts. If you are wrong, admit it. Um, if you said something in anger or said something out of order, admit it. Rather than it come to a point where it come to blows and then you end up with a bigger and bigger mess. And that's what Jesus' advice is. His advice is all righteousness. Being in right relationship with God and right relationship with each other should be better than the Pharisees. The Pharisees were legalistic. They looked at the letter of the law, not the spirit of the law. And the spirit of the law is we are a people of love. We don't murder, but more importantly, we love people. Which things are the way you look at it. You could either focus on love or you could focus on the negative murder. The reality is, murder is never a question for us. I like to put it this way. As Christians, we should do the right thing. Never commit major sin like murder. But we also should do it for the right reason. The right reason is because we're a people of love. We're a people of forgiveness. We're a people of acceptance. So we do the right thing for the right reason. We also do it the right way. There's a right way to do it. Settling the matter quickly rather than let it grow over time and fester. Too many people carry around hate and anger and all those things for years. Jesus is saying, not only do you do the right thing, but do it for the right reason and do it the right way. And then lastly, we should do it in the right time. And the right time is always do it immediately now. Now is the day of salvation. Jesus said, settle the matter immediately, right away, before it gets too big. Too many of us wait and wait. I mean, let's be realistic. How many of us like confrontation? None of us do. But Jesus is saying, if we have something against somebody, settle it quickly while it is small. Deal with it. The earlier we deal with it, the better. That way our righteousness surpassed that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. We'll see other examples next week with adultery and divorce, and then we will probably look at oath and an eye for an eye. All these are just building upon this key verse, verse 24. I tell you that unless your righteousness surpass that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. And I know that we want to not only enter the kingdom of heaven, but truly be light and salt for the world, so that when people see us, they will say, that's what it means to be a Christian. We'll pick up there next week. Thank you, and we'll pick up next week.